Chapter 1: Whispers in the Woods. The forest floor was soft under Lyra's bare feet, cool and quiet. Always so quiet. Inside her small cabin, the air smelled green and earthy, like crushed leaves and damp soil. She held a sprig of silverleaf, its tiny hairs tickling her palm. Her whispers were for the plants alone, a secret language they seemed to understand. Grow strong. Heal well. The words were a soft hum in her chest, a little flicker of something she kept hidden deep, deep inside, because magic like hers wasn't welcome here. It was a curse, a shadow left by a mother she barely remembered, a memory the pack wanted to forget. A tiny scratch of sound came from her door. Lyra froze, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Thump, thump, thump. Her fingers tightened on the silver leaf. She was supposed to be invisible, unseen. It was the only way to be safe. The door creaked open just a sliver. A small, furry head peeked in, followed by a pair of wide, innocent eyes. It was Lyra, a little pup from the pack, clutching her arm. "Lyra," the pup whispered, her voice trembling. Lyra's fear melted away like snow in the sun. She knelt, her worn dress pooling around her. "Oh, little one? What is it?" Lyra showed her a small cut on her forearm, welling with a single drop of red. It was nothing, really. A simple scrape from climbing a tree, most likely. But to a pup, it was everything. Lyra gently took her arm. She didn't use her power, never on others. Instead, she reached for a clay pot filled with a thick, dark paste, a remedy of marigold and sunclover. As she carefully smoothed the balm over the cut, Lyra's breathing evened out. The pup watched her, her head tilted. "You're not scary," Lyra said, so simply it made Lyra's throat ache. "They say you are, but you're not." The words hung in the air, a sad little truth. The pack needed a monster, a reason for their fears, and she was it. Because of her blood, because of what she could do. She gave the pup a weak smile and a small bundle of dried berries. "For the walk back," she murmured. Lyra hugged her leg, a quick, warm squeeze that felt like a lightning strike. A touch she hadn't realized she was starving for. As the pup turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Are you coming to the full moon ceremony tonight?" The question was a stone dropping into a still pond. Lyra's smile vanished. Of course not. She was never invited. She was the Omega who lived at the edge of their world, a ghost in her own pack. But then, a thought struck her. The moonglow herb. A rare, powerful plant she needed for a special sleeping draft. It only bloomed on the night of the full moon. It only grew deep in the sacred grove. A place she was forbidden to go. But she had to have it. The draft was the only thing that kept the nightmares away, nightmares of fire and screaming, and a power she couldn't control. The pup's question echoed in the sudden silence of her cabin. What was scarier, facing the pack's cold stares, or facing another night alone with her dreams? Her decision was made in the quiet space between one breath and the next. She would go. She had to. For just a moment, she would brave their world to get what she needed, then disappear back into the shadows where she belonged. Chapter 2: The Bronze Alpha. To get the supplies she needed for the week, Lyra had to walk near the main pack clearing. This was the part she hated most. It felt like walking through a field of thorns. Every back that turned as she approached, every whisper that died on someone's lips. It all pricked her skin. She kept her head down, her basket clutched tight to her chest, focusing on the worn path. Just get the flour, get the salt, and get out. Her goal was simple, yet it felt like a mountain to climb every single time. It was a journey of 1,000 steps, each one heavy with the weight of being unwanted, of being different, of being her. Then she heard his voice. It cut through the low hum of the clearing like a hunting horn, deep, powerful, annoyed. Alpha Orion. She risked a glance from beneath her eyelashes. He stood near the training grounds, a giant of a man built from muscle and dominance. His hair was the color of dark bronze shining under the afternoon sun. He was talking to Silas, his second in command. Silas was older, with silver in his hair and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. Lyra didn't trust that smile. It was a mask, but she couldn't figure out what it was hiding. "Not a single one is suitable," Orion growled. He wasn't yelling, but his voice carried, a low rumble of thunder that made everyone nearby pretend they weren't listening. They preen and posture, they offer alliances, they offer territory, but none of them have the fire a Luna needs. Lyra's heart gave a painful squeeze. He was talking about a mate. Of course he was. The full moon ceremony was a mating ceremony after all, a time for the Alpha to finally choose his Luna. The pack had been buzzing about it for weeks. Who would it be? An Alpha female from the Silver Creek pack? A warrior from the Northern Ridge? He was looking for power, for a mate who would be a weapon at his side. He wanted a queen, not a partner. Silas nodded, his expression smooth and agreeable. "Strength must meet strength, Alpha. It is the only way to secure our borders, to show dominance." He placed a hand on Orion's shoulder. "The rival pack has been testing our southern patrol. A small problem, but one that needs a firm hand. Perhaps a show of force is in order, before the ceremony tonight? It would remind everyone who leads the strongest pack." Lyra watched as Orion's jaw tightened. He scanned the clearing, his gaze sharp and dismissive. His eyes swept right past her, as if she were a rock or a tree, not even a person. Just nothing. That was worse than hate, wasn't it? To not be seen at all? To be so worthless you didn't even register? A familiar coldness settled in her bones. This was her reality. She was an Omega with a tainted bloodline, a healer who worked in the shadows. To a man like Orion, she was less than dust. The thought should have made her angry, but it only made her feel tired. So very tired. She got her flower, her hands trembling slightly as she paid. She had to get away from here, away from him, away from a world that had no place for her. The ceremony was tonight, and a small, treacherous part of her wondered, what would it be like to be seen? To be wanted? It was a foolish, dangerous thought. A child's wish. She pushed it down, deep down, and hurried back toward the safety of her woods. She had an herb to find, and that was the only thing that mattered. Chapter 3. The scent of nightshade night fell, and the moon climbed the sky, a perfect glowing pearl. It pulled at her, a silent call she felt deep in her blood. The packlands were alive with energy. Bonfires crackled, sending sparks dancing into the darkness. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, pine smoke, and something else. That wild, electric scent of werewolves gathering, of power, of joy. Lyra moved along the edges of the celebration, a shadow slipping between other shadows. Her gray cloak made her nearly invisible. This was a skill she had perfected over years of avoidance. How to walk so no one sees you, how to breathe so no one hears you, how to exist without really being there. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Her goal was the sacred grove, just beyond the far side of the clearing. It felt a world away. She had to pass so many faces. Faces that would turn to her with scorn or suspicion or, worst of all, with pity. She saw Orion then, standing near the great fire, the heart of the party. He looked like a king, strong, confident. He was laughing with his warriors, but his eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching, hunting for the powerful mate he so desperately wanted. Her stomach twisted into a knot. Just get the herb, and go. The thought became a silent chant, a prayer to keep her feet moving. She finally reached the edge of the woods, the entrance to the grove just a few steps away. She could almost taste her freedom. Suddenly, A great howl ripped through the night. The ceremonial mating call. It was Orion. A sound of pure, raw power that silenced every conversation. It vibrated through the ground, up Lyra's legs, and settled deep in her soul. Every wolf, every single one, answered with their own call, a chorus of longing and belonging. But Lyra stayed silent. Her wolf cowered inside her, because that call wasn't for her. It could never be for her. A profound loneliness washed over her, so sharp and cold it stole her breath. This was what it meant to be an outcast, to be surrounded by your own kind and feel utterly, completely alone. As the echoes of the howl faded, something strange happened. Orion, who had been scanning the eligible alpha females, stopped. He lifted his head, sniffing the air. A confused, frustrated look crossed his handsome face. His wolf, the one who was supposed to choose a mate, had gone quiet. Lyra didn't understand, but then she smelled it too. A faint, sweet scent weaving through the smoky air. Nightshade, her magic. It bloomed from her skin when she was anxious, a nervous habit she could never control. And tonight, she was terrified. The scent was getting stronger. Oh no, she had to leave. Now. She turned to flee into the grove, but it was too late. His eyes, intense, golden, and angry, snapped across the crowd and locked directly onto hers. He saw her. For the first time, the great Alpha Orion was looking right at her, and he was coming her way. He pushed through the crowd, his purpose clear, his path unstoppable. Every step he took toward her was a beat of a war drum, sealing her fate. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The ghost was about to be seen. Chapter 4: A Spark of Ruin. The world narrowed to the space between them. For Lyra, every beat of the festive drums became a countdown to her doom as Alpha Orion closed the distance. The sea of wolves parted for him, their curious and scornful eyes a physical weight on her shoulders. He didn't slow. He didn't hesitate. His gaze was a physical thing, pinning her in place, stripping away her cloak of invisibility. Her breath hitched, trapped in her lungs. All she wanted was to run, to melt back into the woods where she belonged. But her feet were rooted to the earth, held fast by the sheer force of his approach. He stopped right in front of her, so close she could feel the heat rolling off his body. The air crackled. He was even bigger up close, a mountain of fury and power. His scent was intoxicating, a wild mix of pine, storm, and something uniquely his own. Something that made the hidden wolf inside her stir for the first time in years. "You," he snarled, the single word a condemnation. He reached out and grabbed her arm, and the world exploded. A shockwave, white-hot and blinding, shot up Orion's arm, a jolt of pure energy that bypassed his skin and slammed directly into his soul. His wolf roared to life inside him, a triumphant, deafening howl of a single word. "Mate!" But his mind recoiled in pure, undiluted rage. Her? This wisp of a girl? A trembling Omega who smelled of dirt and forbidden magic? The moon goddess had to be laughing. This wasn't a blessing. It was a cosmic joke. An insult to his power, to his bloodline, to everything he had built. He felt the bond snap into place, a golden chain linking his soul to hers, and it felt like a shackle. He could feel her terror through it, a fragile, fluttering thing that disgusted and intrigued him. Why didn't she fight? Why did she just stand there, her wide, haunted eyes staring up at him? Lyra gasped as the energy coursed through her. It was nothing like the gentle hum of her own magic. This was lightning, a wildfire. It was terrifying and agonizing, and it felt like coming home. For one dizzying second, the loneliness that had been her constant companion vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of belonging, of being seen, of being found. It was the most wonderful and horrifying feeling of her life. She looked at their joined hands, his fingers a powerful cage around her arm, and saw a faint golden light pulsing just beneath their skin. A physical mark of the bond, their bond. The clearing had fallen silent. Every wolf was staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. The alpha's fated mate was the outcast, the witch's daughter. The whispers started then, a low hiss that slithered through the crowd. This was it. Her deepest fear realized. She was exposed, ruined. Orion's jaw was a hard line of stone. He saw the stares, heard the murmurs. His authority was cracking right before his eyes. He had to control this. Now. He tightened his grip, pulling her away from the prying eyes, his touch rough and unforgiving. He dragged her toward the shadows at the edge of the clearing, his voice a low, dangerous growl meant only for her. "We'll do this my way," he bit out, the words laced with ice. "This is a contract, not a destiny." Chapter 5. A Contract of Thorns. He pulled her into the cold silence of his private study inside the main pack house. The door clicked shut, cutting them off from the world. It felt final, like a cage door locking. Orion released her arm as if burned, turning his back on her to pace the room. He felt like a cornered animal. His wolf was preening, ecstatic, drunk on the proximity of its mate. It wanted to turn back, to pull her into an embrace, to soothe the terror he could feel pulsing from her through their new bond, but the alpha in him was screaming betrayal. How could he stand before his pack, before rival alphas, with her at his side? A weak, magic-tainted omega. It was a political disaster. He had to fix this because allowing this bond to be seen as legitimate would be a fatal show of weakness. He stopped pacing and faced her, forcing his expression into a mask of cold command. She stood by the door, small and still, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked like a frightened fawn, ready to bolt. But her eyes held a spark of something else. Not defiance, not yet, but a watchfulness, a quiet strength that irritated him because he couldn't understand it. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice flat and hard. "The goddess has made a grave error, one that I will be forced to manage." He watched for her reaction, expecting tears, maybe pleading. He got nothing but that silent, unnerving stare. He continued, laying out his plan, his words like sharp, precisely placed stones. "You will be acknowledged, publicly. To avoid the appearance of discord, you will be moved into the alpha's territory. You will be given a room. You will be present at public functions." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "But in private, we are strangers. You will not speak to me unless spoken to. You will not touch me. You will not seek me out. This connection between us," he gestured between them with disgust, "is a political inconvenience. Nothing more. In 1 year we will declare the bond a failure, incompatible. You will be quietly sent away. Do you understand the terms?" Lyra listened, each word a blow. A part of her wanted to crumble. The fragile hope that had sparked to life when their skin touched was being systematically extinguished. He was ashamed of her. He was erasing her. Yet another part of her, the part that had survived years of isolation, was listening for opportunities. He wanted her close to save face? Fine. Being close to the center of the pack, that was a chance. A chance to learn, to find out what really happened to her mother. The pack elders had secrets. She knew they did. Secrets about the fire, about her mother's so-called rogue magic. This was her only way to uncover them. This contract wasn't just a cage. It was a key. She lifted her chin, her voice quiet but surprisingly steady. "I understand them." She met his gaze, and for the first time, she let him see the steel beneath her fear. "But I have a term of my own." Orion's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. The audacity. "I won't be a decoration, Alpha," she said, her voice clear and ringing in the silent room. "I will not be a silent doll you trot out for parties. If I am to be your Luna, even in name only, I will be your Luna. Chapter 6. The Gilded Cage. The next day felt like a dream turning into a nightmare. 2 of the Alpha's guards came to her small cabin. They didn't speak to her, just stood there, their arms crossed, while she packed a single small bag. Leaving her home was like tearing a piece of her soul away. She ran her fingers over the familiar wooden table, worn smooth by years of grinding herbs. She breathed in the earthy scent of her life, of her solitude, of her safety. And then she walked out, leaving it all behind. The walk to the Alpha's main house was a walk of shame. Pack members stopped what they were doing to stare. Their whispers followed her like biting flies. The Omega. The witch blood. What is he thinking? She kept her eyes fixed on the path, her knuckles white where she gripped the handle of her bag. The Alpha house wasn't a home. It was a fortress. It was all dark wood, polished stone, and cold, empty spaces. It smelled of power and money, a sterile, lifeless scent so different from her cabin's wild warmth. A stern-faced female wolf named Helga showed her to a room. It was luxurious, with a soft bed and silk curtains. It was also a prison, a beautiful gilded cage. The Alpha expects you for the evening meal at sundown. You will be presentable, Helga said, her voice dripping with disdain before she turned and left, the click of the closing door echoing the sound of Lyra's old life ending. Loneliness, sharper and more painful than before, crashed down on her. Before, she was a lonely outcast. Now, she was a lonely prisoner. Later that evening, at a formal gathering to welcome allies, the true battle began. Lyra stood awkwardly to the side, a ghost in a borrowed dress. She tried to make herself small, to blend into the tapestries on the wall. But she was a spectacle, the Alpha's unwanted mate. A beautiful she-wolf with fiery red hair and a cruel smile sauntered over to her. Lyra recognized her as Kalia, the Alpha female from the Silver Creek pack, the one everyone assumed Orion would choose. So, Kalia began, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You're the little stray the Alpha found." She circled Lyra slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. "I don't see what's so special. You're plain. You smell of dirt, and you have the presence of a startled mouse." Kalia's friends snickered. Lyra's face burned with humiliation. She wanted to shrink, to disappear entirely. But then she remembered her promise to Orion. "I won't be a decoration." She stood a little taller, meeting Kalia's mocking gaze without flinching. She didn't say a word. Her silence was a shield, a quiet refusal to play the game. Her lack of reaction seemed to infuriate Kalia more than any insult could have. The Alpha female's smile tightened into a snarl. This was just the beginning. Lyra knew it. She was now a target, a symbol of Orion's perceived weakness, and every wolf who wanted power would be coming for her. Chapter 7. Where the Wild Things Grow. The days that followed were a study in survival. Lyra learned the geography of the Alpha house the way a mouse learns the paths in a hawk's territory. She learned which hallways to avoid, which servants' eyes held the most scorn, and which times of day offered the most solitude. After the public confrontation with Kalia, she felt like a raw nerve, every whisper and sideways glance a fresh torment. She needed a place to breathe, a corner of this cold, polished world that felt real. Her search led her past the perfectly manicured rose bushes and the unnaturally green lawns, to a forgotten corner of the estate, hidden behind a crumbling stone wall. A small, rusted iron gate groaned in protest as she pushed it open. And there it was, a secret garden. It was a beautiful disaster. Wild roses choked out lavender bushes, their thorns tangled with grasping ivy. Weeds grew thick and lush, a vibrant green carpet covering what might have once been a path. A stone bird bath was cracked, filled with stagnant, mossy water. To anyone else, it would be an eyesore. To Lyra, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. It was beautifully, wonderfully broken. Just like her. She stepped inside, the gate swinging shut behind her, and the sounds of the pack house faded away. Here, there was only the buzz of insects and the rustle of leaves. She knelt, her fingers sinking into the cool, damp earth. It felt like shaking hands with an old friend. Without thinking, she began to work. She pulled at a thick knot of weeds, their roots releasing a satisfying tear. She untangled a struggling honeysuckle vine, gently freeing it from a thorny prison. And as she worked, a quiet warmth spread from her chest, down her arms, and into her fingertips. A soft, green hum of energy. Her magic. It wasn't a conscious act, it was as natural as breathing. The plants seemed to respond, perking up, their leaves turning a shade brighter. A sad-looking rose bush seemed to straighten, a tightly closed bud unfurling just a little. For the first time since leaving her cabin, a genuine sense of peace settled over her. This was her purpose, not to be a Luna, not to be a pawn in some alpha's game, but to heal, to nurture, to bring life to broken things. A snapped twig broke the spell. Lyra's head shot up, her heart leaping into her throat. Orion stood at the gate, watching her. How long had he been there? His expression was unreadable. Not angry, not disgusted, just watchful. He wasn't looking at her the way he usually did, like she was an unfortunate piece of furniture. He was looking at her like he was seeing her for the very first time. He took in the garden, his gaze sweeping over the vibrant life that seemed to be exploding around her. He had to have noticed the unnatural vitality, the way the light seemed to cling to the leaves where she had touched them. The air between them was thick with unspoken questions. He opened his mouth to say something, but just then, Silas appeared at his side, a smooth, placid smile on his face. Alpha, the patrol has returned. Silas's gaze flickered to Lyra for a fraction of a second, cold and dismissive, before he guided Orion away, his voice a low murmur. The moment was broken. But the image of Orion's questioning eyes stayed with Lyra long after he was gone. Chapter 8. A Healer's Touch. Orion stalked the corridors of the Pack's infirmary, the scent of sickness and fear grating on his senses. One of the youngest pups, a little male named Finn, had fallen ill. A burning fever had taken hold, and for 2 days, the Pack's healers had been useless. They offered chants and common poultices, their methods rooted in traditions that were failing right before his eyes. He looked at the small, shivering form on the cot, his fur matted with sweat, and felt a surge of raw frustration. He was the alpha. These were his people. Their weakness was his weakness. Their suffering was his failure. And this felt like a profound failure. The pup's mother, Lena, looked up at him with desperate, tear-filled eyes, and he had no answers for her. The helplessness was a poison in his veins. He left the infirmary, his mind racing. He needed to project strength, especially now, with his mating situation causing so much instability. As he rounded a corner into one of the main halls, he heard a commotion. A small crowd of Pack members was gathered, whispering and pointing. In the center of the circle was Lyra. She was kneeling on the floor, and in her lap was the sick pup Finn. Lena was beside her, looking torn between hope and terror. Orion's first instinct was a hot flash of rage. What was she doing? Practicing her tainted magic out in the open? Defying him. He started forward, a snarl building in his throat. But then he stopped. He watched. Lyra wasn't chanting. She wasn't performing some dark ritual. She was working. Her movements were calm, efficient, and confident. She held a small bowl of a dark, pungent liquid and was carefully, patiently coaxing drops of it past the pup's lips. She ignored the stares. She ignored the whispers of witch and curse. Her entire focus was on the small life in her hands. There was no fear in her, none of the trembling hesitation he was used to. There was only a deep, quiet competence that was utterly captivating. He stood there for what felt like an hour, leaning against the wall, a silent observer. He watched as the pup's shivering slowly subsided. He watched as the frantic, shallow breaths evened out into a deep, peaceful sleep. He watched as the burning heat he could feel from across the room finally began to recede. Finally, Lyra gently placed the sleeping pup back into his mother's arms. Lena burst into tears, this time of gratitude, hugging Lyra fiercely. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you." The crowd murmured, their scorn now mixed with grudging awe. Lyra simply nodded, her face pale with exhaustion, and stood to leave. Her eyes met Orion's across the hall. He pushed off the wall and walked toward her, his footsteps echoing in the suddenly silent space. The pack members melted away, sensing the shift in their alpha. He stopped directly in front of her. The healer. The outcast. The mate he had rejected. His mind was a storm of contradictions. He was still the alpha who needed a strong warrior Luna, but the man and the wolf were looking at the quiet Omega who had just succeeded where all his traditions had failed. His voice was low, stripped of its usual anger. It held only a raw, burning curiosity. "How?" he asked, the word hanging between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. "How did you do that?" Chapter 9. The Alpha's Shield. The confrontation he'd been dreading came 2 days later. Following the incident with the sick pup, the pack's opinion of Lyra had become complicated. Some still saw a witch, but many others now saw a healer. The gratitude of Finn's family had planted a powerful seed of doubt. Lyra, seeking to avoid the confusing new stairs, had taken to spending most of her time in her wild secret garden. She was there, kneeling in the dirt, and coaxing a stubborn vine to climb a trellis when Kalia found her. The fiery she-wolf didn't come alone. 2 of her followers flanked her, their expressions mean-spirited and hungry for a fight. Lyra's momentary peace shattered. She slowly rose to her feet, her heart starting its familiar, frantic rhythm. "Playing in the dirt?" Kalia sneered, her voice a whip crack in the quiet garden. "How fitting for a little Omega stray. I heard you saved a pup. Don't think for a second that makes you one of us." Lyra said nothing, her silence a stark contrast to Kalia's loud aggression. She simply stood her ground, her hands stained with soil. This quiet stillness seemed to infuriate Kalia more than anything. "When I am Luna," Kalia continued, stepping closer until she was invading Lyra's space, "things like you will be put back in your place. At the very edge of the territory, where you can't contaminate the rest of us." She reached out and grabbed Lyra's arm, her fingers digging in like claws. "Starting now." Just as Kalia's other hand came up, poised to strike, a blur of bronze and fury exploded into the garden. Orion moved faster than Lyra thought possible. One moment he was gone, the next he was there, his hand locked around Kalia's wrist in a grip of iron. A low, terrifying growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so primal it made the air tremble. His eyes were pure gold, the wolf staring out from within the man. The fury radiating from him was a physical force. Mine. The word slammed through his mind, a possessive, instinctive roar that shocked him to his core. He wasn't thinking about politics. He wasn't thinking about appearances. He was thinking that this woman had dared to harm what belonged to him. The realization was as terrifying as it was absolute. Let her go. Each word was a block of ice. Kalia paled, her arrogance instantly vanishing in the face of the Alpha's full, unrestrained fury. She released Lyra's arm as if it were a hot coal, stammering, "Alpha, she was..." Orion cut her off, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You will not touch her again. You will not speak to her again. If I see you even look at her the wrong way, I will consider it a direct challenge to my authority. Am I understood?" Kalia and her followers practically scrambled over each other to get away. Orion stood there, his chest heaving, the aftermath of his rage still humming through him. He turned to Lyra, the gold in his eyes slowly receding. He looked down at the red marks on her arm where Kalia had grabbed her, and a strange protective ache settled deep in his chest. He had just publicly defended her, fiercely. He had claimed her in front of others. an act that went far beyond their cold, sterile contract. The bond between them pulsed, a tangible thing now, humming with his protective instinct and her stunned surprise. He opened his mouth to say something, to explain, but no words came. What could he possibly say? Chapter 10. An Unspoken War. The tense silence that followed them from the garden was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Orion didn't drag Lyra this time. He stalked ahead, the stiff line of his back a wall of controlled fury. He led her back to his study, the same room where he had laid out his cold contract and shut the door with a quiet click that sounded louder than a slam. He was a storm contained in a human form, pacing the length of the room, his movements tight and predatory. The wolf was clawing at the inside of his skin, demanding release, demanding he go back and tear Kalia apart for daring to touch their mate. But the alpha was reeling, thrown into chaos by a single, undeniable emotion, a possessive rage so profound it scared him. He had to understand it, which meant he had to understand her. He finally stopped and whirled to face her. She stood near the door, her arms wrapped around herself, those wide, watchful eyes fixed on him. She wasn't cowering, but she looked fragile, like a winter leaf. "Why?" he demanded, the word ripping out of him, harsh and raw. "Why didn't you fight back? She insulted you. She threatened you. She put her hands on you, and you just stood there." He was searching for a reaction he could recognize. He wanted to see her snarl, to see her eyes flash with anger, to see the same fire in her that was currently consuming him. Because that was strength. That was survival. Her stillness was a language he couldn't comprehend, and it was driving him mad. Lyra flinched at his tone but didn't look away. "Fighting her would have been pointless," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through his anger. "It would have been a spectacle. It was what she wanted. It would have proven I was nothing more than an animal." Orion scoffed, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "You are an animal. We all are. We fight for our territory, for our honor, for our mates. It's who we are. Don't you have any pride?" He took a step closer, trying to force a reaction, trying to make her show him something, anything, other than this infuriating calm. He needed to believe she was weak, because the alternative, that he was simply too blind to see her strength, was a blow to his pride he couldn't handle. "There are different kinds of strength, Alpha," she said, and this time her voice was a little stronger. "Not all battles are won with teeth and claws." Her words were a direct challenge to his entire worldview. Strength was dominance. Strength was fear. Strength was a sharp blade and a loud roar, her quiet endurance, her ability to absorb hatred and not break. What was that? It wasn't weakness. He was beginning to realize that. It was something else entirely. Something he had never encountered before. The bond between them flared, carrying her quiet resolve directly into his chest. It was like a cool stream of water on his raging fire, and the contrast was staggering. He was about to argue, to push her again, to demand she explain herself in a way he could understand, when a piercing shriek ripped through the pack house. An alarm, a high, wailing siren that meant only one thing: invasion. Orion froze. His head snapped toward the window. Warriors were shouting in the halls. The scent of ozone and enemy wolves hit the air. The rival pack. Silas's warning. They were here. Duty slammed back into place, eclipsing everything else. He looked from Lyra's troubled face to the door, his inner war silenced by a real one. He gave her one last, frustrated look. "Stay here. Don't leave this room." Then he was gone, a blur of motion, leaving her alone in the sudden, terrifying silence. Chapter 11. A Bond of Blood and Fury. The echoes of the alarm faded, leaving Lyra in a silence that felt heavier than the noise. He had left her behind. Of course he had. She was a liability, not a partner. His angry words still stung, leaving her feeling small and misunderstood. Needing to escape the suffocating confines of the study, she slipped out, and made her way to the one place that felt like hers, the hidden garden. The chaos of the pack house was a distant roar here. She knelt in the dirt, the familiar act of tending to the plants a balm to her frayed nerves. She didn't know how long she was there, lost in the quiet work of coaxing life from the earth. She was so focused, she didn't hear the whisper-soft footsteps behind her. Not until a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting a guard, or maybe even a curious pack member. But the wolf who stood over her was a stranger. His eyes were cold, flat, and held a chilling emptiness. His scent was wrong, acrid and foreign. He was one of the invaders. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She scrambled to her feet, backing away. "Who are you?" The wolf didn't answer. He just smiled, a cruel slash in his face, and shifted. The change was violent and fast, a sickening crack of bones and stretching of skin. A huge, mangy brown wolf launched itself at her. There was no warning, no challenge. This wasn't a fight for dominance, it was an execution. She dodged, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was no fighter, but she was quick. She used the garden, her garden, as a weapon, ducking behind the thorny rose bushes, kicking dirt into his eyes. But he was relentless. He lunged, his claws catching her side, ripping through her dress and skin. Pain, hot and sharp, exploded through her. She cried out, stumbling back. He had her cornered against the stone wall. He gathered himself for the final lunge, his yellow fangs bared. Despair washed over her. This was it. This was how she died. Alone and forgotten, just like her mother. Orion was a whirlwind of controlled violence at the southern border. He fought with the cold precision of a seasoned alpha, his claws and teeth a deadly extension of his will. They were pushing the invaders back, winning. Then, a searing pain, white-hot and blinding, tore through his chest. It wasn't his. He stumbled, clutching his side, a gasp ripping from his lungs. An image flashed behind his eyes, vivid as a lightning strike. Lyra's face, pale with terror. Claws descending, the stone wall of the garden, the bond. It wasn't a connection, it was a lifeline, and it was screaming that his mate was dying. No! The roar was torn from his soul. He didn't think, he didn't plan. He abandoned the fight, his warriors, his duty. He just ran. Silas appeared in his path, trying to stop him. "Alpha, the fight is here!" Orion shoved him aside without breaking stride, a primal snarl ripping from his throat. Nothing mattered but her. The world became a blur of green and brown as he sprinted through the woods, following the invisible thread that tied his soul to hers. He burst into the garden just as the brown wolf lunged for her throat. Time seemed to slow. He saw the terror in Lyra's eyes, the blood on her side, the finality of the moment. And something inside him broke. A pure, primal rage unlike anything he had ever felt took over. His shift was instantaneous, a violent explosion of bronze fur and fury. He hit the other wolf like a freight train. The fight was not a fight. It was a slaughter. It was swift, brutal, and absolute. When it was over, he stood panting over the mangled body of his enemy, his wolf form trembling with the force of his rage. He shifted back, not caring that he was naked, wounded, and covered in blood. He fell to his knees beside Lyra, pulling her into a desperate, crushing embrace. He buried his face in her hair, his entire body shaking. He was alive. She was alive. And in that moment, nothing else in the universe mattered. Chapter 12. The Whisper of a Kiss. The world came back to Lyra in pieces. The scent of blood, sharp and metallic. The feeling of strong arms holding her together, keeping her from shattering. The sound of harsh, ragged breathing in her ear. She opened her eyes. Orion. He was here, solid and real, his warmth a shield against the cold shock that was setting in. He was hurt. Scratches crisscrossed his chest and arms, bleeding freely. The healer in her, the part of her that was core to her being, pushed through the terror. She pulled back, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch a deep gash on his shoulder. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her voice hoarse. He just looked at her, his golden eyes filled with a raw, wild emotion she couldn't name. It was more than concern. It was devastation. As if watching her near death had ripped something essential out of him. She rose on shaky legs, pulling him up with her. "Come," she said, her voice finding a sliver of its old strength. "We need to get you inside." She led him away from the carnage, away from the dead wolf that lay broken on the ground. She didn't take him to the main house. She took him to her room, the gilded cage that now somehow felt like the only safe place in the world. The silence inside was thick and heavy. He sat on the edge of her bed, watching her with that same intense gaze as she gathered her supplies. A bowl of warm water, clean cloths, her pot of marigold salve. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unstopper the bottle. He reached out and covered her hand with his touch steady and warm. The simple gesture sent a jolt straight through her. She began to clean his wounds. Her touch was gentle, practiced. As her fingers brushed his skin, she felt it again, the hum of the bond. But this time, it wasn't a shockwave. It was a soft, warm current flowing between them. A little of her power, the green, gentle magic she always kept hidden, seeped from her fingertips without her permission. A soft, pale green light flickered around his wounds, and she saw his skin begin to knit together, the bleeding slowing, then stopping completely. He stared at her hands, then back at her face, his expression one of pure, humbled awe. The alpha was gone. The arrogant pride was gone. In their place was a man looking at a woman who had just saved him in more ways than one. The air in the room changed. The scent of blood and fear was replaced by something else, something electric and heady. The tension of the fight gave way to a different kind of tension, one that pulled them closer, tightening the space between them until it was impossible to breathe. He lifted his hand, the one that wasn't holding hers, and slowly, as if afraid she might bolt, he cupped her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, sending shivers down her spine. "Lyra," he murmured, her name a prayer on his lips. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their first real kiss wasn't soft or tender. It was a collision. It was desperate and hungry, a raw, soul-deep confirmation of life. It was the taste of his blood and her tears. It was the frantic beat of two hearts that had almost stopped. It was a promise made in the silent aftermath of violence, sealing a bond that was no longer a contract, but a fierce, undeniable truth. And far below, hidden in the shadows of the house, Silas watched a flicker of green light fade from the window of the Omega's room, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. His plan had failed. It was time for a new one. Chapter 13, Alpha and Luna. Everything was different now. In the days following the attack, the unspoken contract between them had dissolved into ash. Orion found that the cold, empty spaces in the Alpha house felt colder and emptier when Lyra wasn't in them. He sought her out not from duty, but from a gravitational pull he no longer bothered to fight. He'd find her in the garden, her hands in the dirt, a smudge of soil on her cheek, and a quiet peace would settle in his own chest. He had seen her strength now, not the loud, aggressive kind he had always valued, but a deep, resilient strength that had saved a pup's life and faced down a rival alpha without flinching. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant fool, and he was determined to make things right. His chance came during the weekly council meeting. He walked into the stuffy, wood-paneled room with Lyra at his side. The 7-pack elders, ancient wolves with grizzled fur and eyes that had seen 100 winters, stopped their murmuring. Their collective shock was a palpable force in the room. Silas, ever the politician, was the first to recover, rising to offer Lyra a seat with a smile that was all teeth. Orion saw the cold flicker in his advisor's eyes, a seed of distrust planted during the border attack when Silas had tried to stop him from going to her was beginning to sprout. He had to be careful. He was challenging a century of prejudice. He was telling his pack that this quiet Omega, this witch blood, was their equal. The meeting was a drone of tedious reports until a border dispute with a neighboring farm erupted into a heated argument. One elder advocated for a show of force, another for a peaceful compromise. The room was divided. In the past, Orion would have made a swift, decisive command. But today, he did something else. He turned to Lyra. "What do you think?" he asked, his voice calm and clear. The room fell silent. Lyra looked startled, but she didn't hesitate. "The farmer is afraid," she said softly, her voice carrying in the quiet room. "His livestock is his life. If we offer to build a stronger fence for him and compensate him for his lost sheep, he will see us as neighbors, not as threats." Her solution was simple. It was compassionate. It was brilliant. The elders stared, taken aback by her simple wisdom. Orion felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost knocked the wind out of him. Later that evening, as they walked the grounds, he found himself telling her things he'd never told anyone. About the crushing weight of his father's legacy. About his fear of failing the pack. He was showing her the man behind the alpha, the vulnerability behind the armor. He was giving her his trust, a piece at a time. He stopped and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was a simple act, but it was a public declaration. A few pack members saw them, their eyes widening. Let them look. He didn't care anymore. He was no longer fighting the bond. He was building on it. He was choosing her, not because of fate, but because she was Lyra. And that was more than enough. But as they walked, neither of them saw the shadow that detached itself from the trees, a figure who had been listening. His face twisted with a hatred that was curdling into a monstrous new plan. Chapter 14. Whispers of Smoke. A strange and fragile peace had settled over Lyra's life. Days were spent in the garden, coaxing life from the soil. But now she was rarely alone. Orion would join her, his presence a warm, solid comfort. He would help her, his large, powerful hands surprisingly gentle as he tied up a drooping sunflower or cleared away stubborn rocks. They didn't always talk. Sometimes they just existed in the same quiet space, the bond between them a gentle, humming current. It was a taste of a life she had never, ever dared to dream of, a life where she wasn't just tolerated, but cherished. She was standing on the edge of happiness, afraid to take that final step, terrified it would all just vanish like morning mist. And then it did. A siren's scream tore through the peaceful afternoon, a sound of pure panic that ripped her newfound joy to shreds. Then came the smell. Smoke. Acrid and thick, it clawed at the back of her throat. A memory, sharp and terrifying, flashed through her mind, screaming, the heat of a fire on her face, her mother's frantic eyes. She stumbled back, a gasp of pure terror escaping her lips. The garden, her sanctuary, suddenly felt like a trap. The world was burning all over again. Orion was by her side in an instant. He was no longer the gentle man helping with her flowers. He was the alpha. His face was a mask of command, his eyes sharp and focused. "Go inside," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "Lock your door." He was already shouting orders, warriors converging from all directions, their movements a blur of controlled chaos. But as he turned to run toward the smoke, his eyes met hers. And for a second, she saw his terror mirrored back at her. Not just for his pack, but for her. He was afraid for her. Then he was gone, swallowed by the emergency. The reports came back in frantic shouts. The fire was in the northern woods, it was big, and it was moving fast, impossibly fast, like it was alive, like it was hungry. Orion stood on a ridge overlooking the blaze, and a cold dread settled in his gut. This was no normal forest fire. The flames were an unnatural color, a sickly green licking at the edges of the orange. The wind was whipping it into a frenzy, pushing it directly toward the pack's residential sector. His warriors fought with desperate courage, creating fire breaks, hauling water. But it was like trying to stop the tide with a bucket. For every section they contained, the fire would leap 50 feet, starting new fronts. It was strategic. It was intelligent. This was an attack. But by who? The rival pack? It didn't feel like their work. This felt darker, more sinister. He heard a shout, and his blood ran cold. The fire had jumped the river. It was now racing toward the old lands, the place where the outcasts used to live, the place where Lyra's mother had died. He looked back toward the Alpha House, a desperate, protective instinct warring with his duty. He was losing. His pack was losing. And the fire was heading straight for the heart of Lyra's darkest memories. Chapter 15. The Whisper of the Forest. Lyra couldn't stay inside. The polished walls of her room were a cage, each tick of the clock a countdown to disaster. She could feel the fire. It was more than just seeing the smoke and hearing the shouts. She could feel the forest's agony deep in her soul. The ancient trees were screaming. The animals were fleeing in terror. It was a wave of pain that crashed against her senses, and it was becoming unbearable. This was her home. These were her woods. And they were dying. She ran. She ignored the guards who yelled for her to stop, her feet flying over the ground, her body moving with a purpose she hadn't felt before. She knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, where she had to go. She found the clearing at the heart of the approaching firestorm. The heat was a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Embers rained down like angry orange snow. Through the swirling smoke, she saw Orion. He was there, his face streaked with soot, his eyes wild with desperation. He was fighting a losing battle, a king watching his kingdom turn to ash. He saw her, and his eyes widened in disbelief and fear. "Lyra, get back, it's not safe!" But she just walked toward him, the heat pressing in on all sides. She stopped a few feet away, and in the roaring chaos of the fire, they were in their own silent world. She looked at him, her heart in her eyes. She didn't need words. Her gaze said it all. "I can stop this. You have to trust me." Orion stared at her, his mind struggling to catch up. He saw the power humming just beneath her skin, a visible aura of pale green light. He saw the absolute certainty in her eyes. All his life, he had been taught that magic like hers was a curse, an unstable force of destruction. It was the reason her mother had been exiled, the reason she had died. But looking at Lyra now, he didn't see a curse. He saw a solution. He saw his pack's only hope. His warriors were falling back, beaten. The fire was seconds from consuming them all. He had to make a choice: trust his traditions or trust his mate. It wasn't a choice at all. He gave a single, sharp nod. That was all she needed. Lyra closed her eyes, took a deep breath of smoky air, and for the first time in her life, she let go. She didn't just open the door to her power, she tore the entire wall down. The energy that surged through her was immense, a wild, untamed river. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. She didn't shout. She didn't chant. She whispered to the forest. A silent plea, a desperate command. Enough. The world responded. The wind, which had been fanning the flames, stopped. Then it shifted, turning back on the fire with a vengeful howl. The sky above the clearing, which had been orange with firelight, turned a dark, bruised purple. A single drop of rain hissed on a hot rock, then another, then 1,000. A sudden, torrential downpour fell from the sky, a focused deluge that hammered down on the fire with incredible force. The blaze faltered, steamed, and died. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the rain. The pack members stared, their faces a mixture of awe and terror. And into that stunned silence, a single voice boomed, filled with poison and false piety. It was Silas. "She's a witch," he screamed, pointing a trembling finger at Lyra. "Don't you see? She summoned the fire to show her power. She is the one who did this." Chapter 16. A Spark of Treason. The rain fell in soft, cleansing sheets, washing the ash from the leaves and the soot from the air. Lyra stood in the center of the clearing, trembling from the aftermath of the power she had unleashed. It had been like holding the ocean inside her chest and then letting it go. She was empty, exhausted, but a small, fierce flicker of triumph was blooming within her. She had saved them. She looked at Orion, and through the bond she felt his awe, a wave of pure, unadulterated pride that warmed her to the bone. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged. She was their hero. Then, Silas's voice, sharp and venomous, sliced through the reverent silence, and her world, so newly built, came crashing down. "She's a witch." The words were a physical blow. Lyra staggered, the accusation so monstrous, so impossible, that her mind couldn't grasp it at first. "She summoned the fire to show her power." He was pointing at her, his face a mask of righteous fury, but his eyes were cold and triumphant. He had been waiting for this. He had planned this. The pack, moments before looking at her with wonder, now shifted. Their expressions curdled. Awe became fear. Respect became suspicion. The old terror, the deep-seated fear of rogue magic that had haunted their pack for a generation, resurfaced like a plague. Whispers started, ugly and familiar. Witch blood, just like her mother. She was always a curse. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She turned her eyes to the only person who mattered, to Orion. She pleaded with him in the silent language of their bond. "Tell them. You know the truth. Please." Orion felt Lyra's panic as if it were his own, a frantic fluttering against his soul. Just moments ago, he had been looking at a goddess, a creature of impossible power and grace who had commanded the very heavens to save them. He had never been more proud, never been more certain of his love for her. Silas's words were a calculated strike, aimed not at Lyra, but at the heart of the pack's oldest fears. He saw the shift ripple through the crowd, saw the fear poisoning their faces. His logical mind, the part of him that was Lyra's mate, screamed in outrage. "It's a lie! She saved us!" But the ancient, instinctual part of him, the alpha responsible for a volatile and terrified pack, hesitated. He could feel their collective panic, a rising tide of superstition that threatened to sweep away all reason. He was their leader. He was supposed to be the voice of calm, of order. But what do you do when your people are screaming for a monster to blame? His mind became a battlefield. His love for her on one side, 1,000 years of pack law and fear on the other. And in that one fatal moment of conflict, he hesitated. That hesitation was a betrayal she felt through the bond, a sudden chilling silence where his support should have been. Chapter 17, The Weight of Silence. Orion stood frozen, trapped in the crossfire of his own making. The pack's fear was a living entity now, a snarling beast that Silas was expertly feeding. "Her mother burned," someone shouted from the back, the words a lit match tossed into a pool of oil. "She used her dark magic and lost control." The lie, so old and poisonous, took on a new life. It spread from wolf to wolf, their fear twisting Lyra's miracle into a monstrous act of aggression. Orion's heart hammered against his ribs. He wanted to roar, to tell them they were fools, to defend her with his last breath. But the alpha in him was screaming a different warning. Control your pack, maintain order, do not let chaos reign. He was the dam holding back a flood, and he could feel himself cracking. Silas saw his advantage. He saw the alpha's indecision, and he struck, his voice ringing with false authority. "The law is clear. Uncontrolled magic is a threat to us all. For the safety of the pack, she must be contained until the elders can pass judgment." He turned to two of Orion's most trusted guards. "Take her." The guards looked to Orion, their eyes searching for a command, a counter-order, anything. But none came. Orion's throat was tight, his limbs heavy as stone. His mind was a maelstrom of what he should do versus what his role demanded he do. If he defied the pack now, In this state of panic, they would see it as him choosing a witch over them. He could lose their loyalty, their trust. He could shatter the pack he was sworn to protect. It was a catastrophic, cowardly miscalculation, a choice made from fear instead of love, and he knew it the second it was made. He watched, as if in a terrible dream, as the guards moved toward Lyra. He saw her eyes, wide with disbelief, find his across the clearing. He saw the desperate, fragile hope in them plead with him one last time, and then he saw that hope shatter, extinguished by his silence. It was the most profound failure of his life. The guards took her arms, their touch hesitant but firm. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just went limp, her spirit seeming to collapse inward. Her head bowed in defeat. As they began to lead her away, she lifted her head and gave him one final look. There was no anger in it, no hatred. There was only a deep, bottomless ocean of heartbreak, a look that said, "I trusted you." That silent condemnation was a blade that carved out his soul. He had stood by and watched his world, his mate, his honor, get dragged away, and the only thing he had done was watch. The silence he left in his wake was the loudest, most damning sound he had ever known. Chapter 18. A Cell of Echoes. The cell was a box of cold stone and old sorrows. It smelled of damp earth, mildew, and the faint, lingering despair of everyone who had been locked inside it before her. Lyra sat on a thin pile of straw, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to make herself as small as possible. The physical cold was nothing. It was the ice that had formed around her heart that made her shiver. His betrayal played over and over in her mind. Not the pack's scorn. She was used to that. It was Orion's silence, his stillness, the look of conflict in his eyes as he chose his pack's fear over her truth. She had saved them all. She had bared her soul, her deepest, most terrifying secret, and trusted him to be her shield, and he had let them take her. A tear, hot and lonely, slid down her cheek. All the hope she had carefully, foolishly, allowed to grow over the past few weeks was gone. It had been a lie, a beautiful, wonderful lie. The moments in the garden, the feeling of his hand in hers, the desperate, life-affirming kiss. It all felt like a story that had happened to someone else. She was right back where she started. No, it was worse. Before she had been an outcast, but she had been safe in her solitude. Now she was a prisoner, condemned by the man her very soul had chosen. She was her mother. The thought was a bitter poison. A woman with a gift no one could understand, destroyed by the fear of those she loved. Was this her destiny? To be a tragic echo of a story already told? To die alone in a cell, branded a monster? Despair, heavy and suffocating as a shroud, settled over her. What was the point of fighting? What was the point of being strong? Her strength had saved them, and it had earned her a prison sentence. Her love had been given to an alpha who was not brave enough to accept it. Maybe the pack was right. Maybe her power was a curse. Maybe she was a monster. She curled into a tighter ball, the straw pricking her cheek. She just wanted it all to end. To close her eyes and disappear. To feel nothing. It was in that moment, at the absolute bottom of her despair, that she heard it. A faint, hesitant sound from the other side of the heavy, iron-banded door. Scratch. Scratch. A soft whine followed. It was a small, familiar sound. Lyra lifted her head, her brow furrowed. Scratch. Scratch. Whimper. It was the little pup. Alara. The one whose arm she had healed. She had found her way down to the dungeons. Alone. A tiny, persistent sound of loyalty in a world that had abandoned her. A single, flickering candle of hope in the suffocating darkness. Chapter 19. A Scent of Treachery. Guilt was a poison, and Orion was dying from it. In the suffocating silence of his study, The image of Lyra's face as she was dragged away was burned into his mind. Her shattered trust, her silent heartbreak. He had failed. In the single most important moment of his life, he had failed as a male, as a mate, and as an alpha. His wolf clawed at his insides, a beast sick with shame. He paced the room, the memory of the fire playing over and over in his head. It didn't make sense. The speed of the blaze was unnatural. The sickly green color of the flames. It wasn't right. He tried to grasp the details, to force logic onto a situation that had been pure chaos. And then, a memory surfaced. A detail he had missed in the heat of the moment. It was a scent. Just before the fire, when he and Silas had been talking, he'd noticed a faint chemical smell clinging to his advisor's clothes. He had dismissed it at the time, but it was the same acrid smell he'd detected on the rogue who had attacked Lyra in the garden. The very same. The pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The ambush. The fire. Lyra's public display of power. It wasn't a series of unfortunate events. It was a setup. A perfectly orchestrated, diabolical frame job. And Silas, his trusted friend and advisor, the man who had served his father, was behind it all. The realization didn't just bring anger. It brought a chilling, terrifying clarity. Silas hadn't just betrayed him. He had used the pack's deepest fears as a weapon. He had nearly gotten Lyra killed. The guilt that had been poisoning him slowly now burned away, replaced by a cold, lethal rage. He knew what he had to do. He moved with a singular purpose, his steps silent and swift as he descended into the cold darkness of the dungeons. He found the small pup, Alara, still faithfully whining outside Lyra's cell door. A pang of shame hit him. This child was braver than he had been. He knelt, stroking the pup's head to quiet her, using her small body as a shield from the view of the distant guards. He pressed his face to the cold iron slot of the door. "Lyra," he whispered, his voice cracking. He saw her shadow move within the darkness. "Lyra, it's me." She said nothing. The silence was a condemnation, a wall he had built with his own cowardice. He closed his eyes, his pride turning to dust. "I was wrong," he choked out, the words tasting like ash. "I was a coward. I let their fear guide me, and I betrayed you. There is no excuse, but I am asking. No, I am begging you. Please, forgive me." He waited, his heart a stone in his chest, ready for the rejection he so thoroughly deserved. Chapter 20. Whispers and Evidence. His voice, raw with a pain that mirrored her own, was the first crack in the ice that had frozen her soul. Lyra had been curled in the darkness, listening to the loyal little pup on the other side of the door, when Orion's whisper had reached her. Every part of her wanted to stay silent, to let him suffer in the prison of his own guilt. But the genuine agony in his voice, the complete shattering of his pride, it was an undeniable truth. He wasn't the arrogant alpha from the start of their story. He was a broken man begging for a forgiveness he didn't think he deserved. The pup's loyalty had been a candle in the dark. His confession was the sunrise. She pushed herself off the straw-covered floor and moved to the door. "He planned it," she whispered back, her voice raspy from disuse. "Silas, he planned all of it." On the other side of the door, she heard Orion's sharp intake of breath. "I know," he said, his voice laced with a newfound venom. "I know. But knowing and proving are two different things. The elders will demand proof." Lyra closed her eyes, her mind, now clear of the fog of despair, beginning to work. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a cold, hard resolve was forming. Her goal was no longer just to survive, it was to fight back. "The wolf in the garden," she said, her thoughts racing. He didn't act alone. He smelled of Silas and of fear. They were a team now, their minds working as one through the thick wooden door. He had the pack's loyalty. She had the pack's secrets. He had the strength. She had the power. "I can find it," she said, an idea blooming, dangerous and bold. "The proof. My magic isn't just for storms and healing, Orion. It's connected to the life of the forest, to memories." Orion unlocked the cell, and the moment the door swung open, he pulled her into an embrace that was less about passion and more about a desperate spiritual reunion. After a moment, she pulled back. "We need to find where the rogue hid his things, something that ties him to Silas." He led her from the dungeons, cloaked in shadows. They slipped out of the pack house and into the moonlit forest. In a secluded clearing, she stopped. "I need you to guard me," she murmured. "This will take all of my focus." He nodded, his expression grim, and took up a defensive stance, his eyes scanning the darkness. Lyra sat on the ground, closing her eyes. She didn't reach for the raw power of the storm. She reached for something quieter. A whisper. She followed the faint, lingering trail of the dead rogue's terror, the residue of his violence that still stained the garden. The forest responded, its whispers guiding her, showing her images, scents, and echoes of the past. A hollow log, a hidden satchel, the scent of Silas's personal seal wax. "There," she breathed, opening her eyes and pointing to the north. A hollow oak tree by the creek. He hid his payment there. Together they ran, their purpose singular. They found the tree and inside a leather pouch containing not just coin, but a letter of instruction, sealed with Silas's own crest. They had their proof. The game had changed. Chapter 21. The Council of Lies. The next day, Orion called an emergency council meeting. The air in the Great Hall was thick with tension and confusion. He strode to the center of the room, but this time, he was not alone. Lyra was at his side, her hand in his. She was no longer the trembling Omega hiding in the shadows. She stood tall, her expression calm and resolute, meeting the gazes of the shocked elders without flinching. She was his Luna, and today, the entire pack would know it. Silas was already there, his face a perfect mask of concerned leadership. He gave Lyra a look of pity that made Orion's blood boil. The snake was about to strike, but today, Orion was ready. "I have called this council to address the heinous accusation made against my mate," Orion began, his voice booming through the hall, rich with an authority he hadn't felt in days, "and to expose a traitor who has been living among us, poisoning this pack with lies for his own gain." A wave of murmurs swept through the assembled pack. He held up the leather pouch. This belonged to the rogue who attacked Lyra. Inside, we found payment and instructions, sealed with the personal crest of the wolf who hired him. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in before turning and leveling a finger directly at his second in command. Silas. The name dropped like a stone in the silent room. Gasps of disbelief and shock erupted. Silas, the respected advisor, the loyal friend, it was impossible. Silas, for his part, played his role perfectly. He looked shocked, then deeply wounded. "Alpha, you can't believe this. It's a trick, a plant. The witch is clouding your mind with her dark magic to save her own skin." He turned to the crowd, his voice pleading. "I have served this pack my entire life. I served your father. Would I betray you? Or is it more likely that the witch who summoned a firestorm is capable of forging a letter?" Then, Lyra spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was so clear and filled with such quiet conviction that it silenced the entire hall. "He is right about one thing," she said, her gaze sweeping over the faces of the pack members. "I am a witch. My mother was a witch. We have the power to hear the whispers of the forest." She took a step forward, her fear gone, replaced by a strength they had never seen. "And the forest told me that Silas met with the rival pack 2 months ago. It told me he promised them our southern territory in exchange for creating a border dispute. A dispute to distract our alpha. The forest told me it was his scent on the accelerant that started the fire." a fire he knew I would have to stop. Her words were not an accusation. They were a statement of fact, delivered with a certainty that was unshakable. The pack stared, their loyalties torn, their minds a whirlwind of confusion. They looked from their stoic, trusted advisor to the strange, powerful woman who was their Luna. They didn't know who to believe. Seeing his support waver, seeing his intricate web of lies begin to unravel, Silas finally broke. The mask of civility shattered, and the true monster was revealed. With a roar that was more beast than man, he shifted, his body contorting into the enraged form of a massive, snarling wolf. He ignored Lyra. His target was the alpha who had exposed him. He launched himself directly at Orion. Chapter 22: A Union of Fang and Vine. The world exploded into a chaos of fang and claw. Before Silas's enraged wolf form could even reach him, Orion met the charge, his own shift a seamless, violent ripple of muscle and fur. They collided in the center of the council hall with a sound like thunder, a brutal impact that splintered the great wooden table. The pack scrambled back, their shock and fear creating a ring around the two battling alphas. Orion fought with the raw, brutal power of his bloodline, his bronze fur a blur of motion. But Silas was a different kind of fighter. He was older, more cunning. He had taught Orion how to fight, and now he used that knowledge against him, dodging, weaving, and landing shallow, irritating cuts that were designed to bleed Orion's stamina dry. Every move Orion made, Silas seemed to anticipate it, his silver-streaked fur a ghost in the chaos. Orion felt his frustration mounting, his rage making him sloppy. He was the stronger wolf, but he was losing. Then he felt her. A calm, steady presence washing over the chaotic fury of their bond. It was Lyra. She was not panicking. She was focusing. A strange, powerful peace emanated from her, cutting through his rage and clearing his mind. He risked a glance at her. She stood near the edge of the fighting ring, her eyes closed, her hands slightly raised. She was not watching the fight. She was feeling it. Lyra couldn't watch them tear each other apart. It was a language of violence she refused to speak. She felt Orion's frustration, his waning strength. She knew he couldn't win this way. Brute force against cunning would only lead to exhaustion. So she closed her eyes and reached out, not to the sky for a storm, but to the earth beneath her feet. She felt the ancient stones of the foundation, the massive wooden beams that had held this roof up for centuries. She felt the life within the wood, the deep sleeping power in the earth. Her power wasn't just for healing plants, it was for commanding them. With a silent, focused command, she called to that life, waking it from its long slumber. Orion was on the defensive, Silas's jaws snapping inches from his throat. He stumbled back, his paws sliding on the polished stone floor. This was it. Silas lunged, his teeth bared for the killing blow. Suddenly, the floorboards around the silver wolf groaned. They splintered. Thick, gnarled roots, ancient and powerful, erupted from the ground, coiling around Silas's legs like living snakes. Woody vines shot from the walls and ceiling, wrapping around his torso and neck, pulling him back, holding him fast. He roared in shock and rage, trapped in an inescapable prison of living wood. The pack gasped in collective awe. The moment of stunned silence was all Orion needed. With a final, powerful lunge, he ended the fight. He stood panting over the defeated traitor, the truth of their victory echoing in the silent hall. It was not his strength alone that had won. It was hers. It was theirs together. Chapter 23: The Bloom of Respect. Silence. The only sounds in the ruined hall were Orion's ragged breaths and the faint creak of the vines as they held the defeated Silas. The battle was over. The traitor was exposed. Lyra opened her eyes, the energy she had summoned receding, leaving her feeling tired but strangely steady. She looked at the pack. They were all staring at her, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and something she had never, ever seen directed at her before. Respect. The fear was gone. In its place was a dawning understanding. Her magic wasn't a curse to be feared, but a power to be revered. It was a shield for the pack, not a sword against it. Orion shifted back, his human form bruised, bleeding but victorious. He walked to her, ignoring everyone else in the room. He didn't say a word. He just took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and stood by her side. An alpha and his Luna. Equals. Partners. That simple public gesture sealed their victory more than the fight itself had. Then, something incredible happened. An old warrior, one of the elders who had looked at her with the most suspicion, slowly, deliberately, knelt. Then another, and another. Soon the entire pack was kneeling, not just to their alpha, but to her, to Lyra, the outcast, the healer, the witch, their Luna. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. The loneliness that had been her skin for her entire life was finally gone. She had a home. Her first act as their Luna was not to give a speech or accept their praise. She saw the warriors who had been injured in the scuffle. She saw the fear and shock on the faces of the young ones. Her healer's instinct, the very core of who she was, took over. She gently pulled her hand from Orion's and went to the nearest wounded wolf, her touch gentle, her voice a soothing murmur. She began to heal, her green magic a soft, warm glow in the dimly lit hall. She was not a warrior queen who ruled by fear. She was a compassionate leader who ruled with kindness. And as she worked, she felt the pack's fear of her magic transform into a deep, abiding gratitude. The open wounds of the past, her mother's tragedy, her own isolation, were finally beginning to close. She had not only saved her pack, she had healed it. Chapter 24. Where We Belong. Several weeks later, Orion woke to the smell of damp earth and blooming moonflowers. He didn't have to open his eyes to know that Lyra was awake, tending to the small indoor garden she had cultivated on their balcony. He lay there for a moment, listening to her soft humming, and a sense of peace so deep it felt like it had settled into his bones, washed over him. Their room, not his, was no longer the cold, sterile chamber of an alpha. It was a home. Her books on herbs and history were stacked on his shelves. Her vibrant green plants had reclaimed every corner, their leaves turning to catch the morning sun. It was a perfect fusion of their two worlds, a fusion of his strength and her life. He rose and went to her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back against him, her hands still covered in soil. They stood there in a comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the mountains. He remembered the arrogant alpha he had been, the one who believed power was measured only in the sharpness of one's claws and the fear one could inspire. That wolf seemed like a stranger to him now. Lyra had taught him the truth. True strength was the courage to heal, the power to nurture, and the wisdom to love. She hadn't just saved his pack. She had saved him from himself. His love for her was no longer a shocking jolt or a possessive fire. It was a deep, steady river that ran through the very center of his soul. It was constant. It was calm. It was everything. "The council has officially recognized your mother's magic as a blessing," he murmured into her hair. "They have rewritten the laws. No one will ever be exiled for their gifts again." He felt her breath catch, and she turned in his arms, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She had not only cleared her own name, she had redeemed her mother's memory, ensuring no one would suffer that same fate again. She had truly changed their world. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a kiss that was no longer desperate or hungry but filled with a deep, unbreakable trust. It was a kiss that spoke of shared sunrises, of quiet evenings, of a future they would build together. As he deepened the kiss, pulling her closer, he knew with absolute certainty that the core question that had once haunted him had been answered. You could not only love and trust someone whose secret could change everything, you could build an entire world on that love, a better, stronger world. His final thought before he lost himself in her was simple and absolute. Home. He was finally home.